welcome our amazing guest speaker, Melissa. I had a little look-see through her LinkedIn and my mind is blown. So hopefully at the end of the session, everyone will be as excited as I am. Just a little housekeeping. We're asking everyone to mute their mics. Use the chat feature if you have questions to share at the appropriate time, and use the raise hand and the other emoticon features. We want to feel the energy. So if there's something that's being shared, you're excited about it, please go ahead and show some love. I know we have been like killed to death with Zoom meetings, but we still want to have the energy and still want to be excited this morning. We're so grateful that Melissa took the time. And so we just want to make sure she feels appreciated and warm. And just to also advise you, this session will be recorded. So be on your best behavior. Just kidding. So let's get started. Atlas Core. Do I mute everyone? Do I have a button to mute everyone?
Don't worry about it, Tasia.
Good. Okay, good. So let us get this morning started, or this session started, with an introduction of our guest. And I'm so excited to introduce Melissa Sassi. Melissa is the Chief Penguin of IBM's Hyper-Protect Accelerator. And yes, she created her own title, Penguin. She works with early stage entrepreneurs on digital and business transformation. Have you heard of Call for Code? It's an IBM initiative that's preparing and responding to climate change via tech innovation, and Melissa is a judge on Call for Code. Prior to IBM, she was at Microsoft. She spent several years building internet and access networks and introducing digital skills to newly connected communities. Melissa is also the founder and CEO of MentorNations. MentorNations is a youth-led digital skills movement in Africa, and that movement has taught thousands, tens of thousands of youth to code across 12 countries. She's the chair of IEEE's Digital Intelligence Working Group, and she's on the steering committee of the Coalition for Digital Intelligence with the World Economic Forum, OECD, IEEE, and the DQ Institute. She's also a founding member of broadbandpolicy.org, and she holds board positions with TACMIL, a nonprofit with 30 informal schools in rural Pakistan, and Tech Women Asia, an Afghanistan-based nonprofit that's focused on tech skill building for young Afghani women. As if that is not enough, Melissa holds 2 master's degrees, and she's currently pursuing a PhD. Her PhD research focuses on digital inclusion of underrepresented communities. She serves on roundtables within the UN, and she's been a speaker on more than 100 topics involving digital inclusion, community building, youth empowerment, imposter syndrome, and personal branding. Melissa, thank you so much. We're so excited. That was a mouthful, and we're so excited to get started. So to get started, the most interesting question would be Penguin. Tell us what inspired that title, and why a penguin among all other things you could have chosen.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, my name is Melissa Sassi, and I am the Chief Penguin of IBM Z, so the IBM Z division of IBM. For those of us who are technologists, which I know not all of us are, and those of you who are not, get ready. You need to be aware of digital skills too, because it's all about the future of work. But for those of us who are familiar with technology and open source technology specifically, the symbol of open source, or the animal of open source, is a penguin. Now, you know, as you mentioned, I spent time at Microsoft. When I was at Microsoft, I worked with a gal, amazing woman, Donna Sakar, who is an entrepreneur, a fashionista, an engineer, a developer advocate. She's so many things all at once, an author, a speaker. And she gave herself the job title, the Chief Ninja Cat. She's a very good friend of mine, and I felt a little bit jealous. I thought, wait a second, why don't I have this animal title? And, you know, I was working in a team that was probably a bit less progressive than Donna's team when it came to animal titles. So I went with it, and I just had a bit of a bit of FOMO as I was working with Donna. And then I met this guy who's got this Twitter handle called Thready the T-Rex. And Microsoft started making these ceramic dinosaurs that they would bring along to events. And they had like pins and t-shirts and all this stuff. And I'm like, man, we've got a Ninja Cat, we've got a T-Rex. I got nothing, you know? And then I went to Pakistan and I met a woman, and this is after I moved to IBM. And I met an amazing woman in Karachi, Pakistan. Are you looking for this? There you go.
Sorry.
All right, so I met this, and sorry for the interruption. My camera was not sitting up straight, and I took my friend's mail to hold it up, and he says, "Where's my mail?" And I was using it to hold up my camera. All right, cool. We found another solution. So I was in Karachi, Pakistan, and I met this woman named Jihan Ada. And Jihan heads up this incubator in Karachi called the Nest IO. And her job title is the Big Bird. So we've got the Big Bird of the Nest, we've got Thready the T-Rex, and we've got the Chief Ninja Cat. And I thought, you know what? I need something like this too. And with IBM's purchase of Red Hat, which is on the forefront of open source, I thought, penguin, I can be a penguin. There, the chief penguin was born. And so I changed my job title in our corporate directory. My leadership team asked me if titles were important. And I said, whatever title you're going to give me, it is not going to be as fun as chief penguin. So that's what I'm going with.
Awesome.
And there you go.
Melissa, thank you so much. It is exciting. It definitely is food for thought. And we're so happy that there's a really deep story behind this. So thought for everyone in the event that you ever get an opportunity to make your own title. It would be good to kind of know what you want to represent.
Yeah, I believe that rules are someone else's opinion, and you should be able to call yourself whatever you want to call yourself. I always say something that I also learned from my friend Donna Sakar, and that we should all be ands and not ors. And what I mean by that is we should all be the many things that we want to be. You know, for me, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an intrapreneur, meaning I innovate inside of big tech. So I'm an entrepreneur inside of someone else's company. Yeah. I'm a speaker. I'm an author. I'm an academic. You know, I work in the nonprofit space, in the diplomatic space. Yeah. So why should I choose one thing when somebody asks me, what do you do? Yeah. Or who are you?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa. All right, so we're so excited. We're going along with this story. And so we heard about the penguin, but tell us a little bit more about before that, your professional journey, what motivated you to get into the tech sector, and how did you get your start?
Yeah, for sure. So my journey into tech actually comes from tragedy. It comes from my worst nightmare. And I know some people have heard this story before, others it might be new for you. So for those of you who have heard it before, sit down and hold on, we're gonna go through it again. But for those of you who haven't heard it before, I hope it inspires you to think about how can bad things happen and how do you see the light at the end of the tunnel or the blessing within the curse? So about 14 years ago, my children and I became victims of parental kidnapping. Now, what that means, for those of you like, parental kidnapping, what does that mean? My children's father kidnapped my children. Now, my children are safe, they're healthy, they're normal adjusted kids. I know where they are, but I never got them back for a long story of reasons. And they're mainly political, bureaucratic red tape, corruption, and many, many other things that are often, complicated when you're talking about having to go to court, family court specifically, in another country, a country where the norms might be different than yours, or the language might be different than yours, or a place where you just frankly don't know how things work. For those of us who've spent time in and outside of our countries, we know that each place is a little bit different. And imagine you need to go and fight a court case in another country. And imagine the rule of law or, corruption is a challenge in that country. Who do you talk to? Who do you trust? What do you do? Scary, especially when you're talking about your children. I had a few different options. Some of them were very, very unsavory, which we'll put aside for now. I had many people come to me and say, all right, I'm ready. I've got an arsenal. We're going to go and kidnap the kids. We're going to bring them back. We're going to bury them in the desert. I said, I think I better not get involved in, murder. That doesn't sound like a good choice for me and my life. I don't want to go into hiding with my children for the rest of my life. Because at the end of the day, even though this bad thing happened, he's still their father, right? And so I realized over time that my connection to my children was technology. Because in a sense, I was a mother from afar. Now, don't get me wrong. I visited as often as I could, very uncomfortable at times. Imagine you go stay with the family who kidnapped your children. Scary, hard, complicated, scary. I'll say that again. I realized that I needed to learn to speak their dialect of Arabic. Now, I'm not perfect. I learned to speak Tunisian Arabic. Now, I don't want anyone to get the picture that, this is something that is common across everyone in this particular country, because I know there is a lot of media misinformation and disinformation out there around certain parts of the world when it comes to gender dynamics or, marital relations. I don't believe that there is any one country or one group of people on this planet that's just inherently bad. A person made a bad decision and it impacted a lot of lives. Now, one day, my daughter said to me, Mommy, I'm learning Microsoft. That's her accent. And I was working at Microsoft at the time. And I was like, oh, what do you mean? What are you doing? And I realized she was learning Word in her classroom without access to technology. And what I mean by that is they had one laptop for 40 children to share. And I know that's very common around the world. And it's also very common to not have access to the internet. 48% of the world is not connected to the internet. So roughly half does not even have access to the internet, let alone a device they can afford. And when I looked at my daughter's situation, I thought, I might not have been able to be the mother I could have been, should have been, would have been, wanted to be, deserved to be. But I'm not going to focus on that because that's not going to do anything for anyone. It's just going to, make me depressed and make me kind of wallow in my sorrows. So I thought, how can I get devices into her classroom? That's where it all started. And I didn't plan on creating this world-changing movement. I didn't plan to ever tell my story in front of the UN or, world leaders or anything like that. But I ended up going from wanting to get 30 computers into this one classroom to creating a program through that was funded by Microsoft and HP, where we sent 400 computers to 20 schools across the country. I took 3 weeks from my work to start to educate young people with a group of my friends, a group of engineers. And we went out and we spent 3 weeks teaching kids to code. And what we discovered was that this little trip, this little thing, was something that was so impactful for these children in all 26 regions of the country. And we realized that we didn't just have a challenge that we could solve in this country. It could be something that could be impactful for the entire continent, the region, and the world. And so we created MentorNations really as a youth-led movement to empower young people through learning technical skills and providing economic opportunity. And I realized that this was my secret sauce. It helped me compartmentalize my personal life and my personal challenges. And it also helped me put my energy, my negative energy, into something bigger than myself. So now I like to say I turned my worst nightmare into my superpower by focusing on how me as a digital mother could empower others to make meaningful use of the internet in front of them. For me, meaningful use is being a mother to my kids from afar. It's being able to work remotely. It's being able to teach others the technical skills that they need to either be a technology entrepreneur or just thrive in the future of work. So that's really been my journey into tech.
Wow, Melissa, thank you so much. I am blown away. Two things that stood out for me. One, the fact that you are able to put this entire experience together in the form of a story, and right? We give information every day, we're bombarded with information, but then storytelling is such a beautiful way to share. And so I just want to call that out. And the second thing that stood out is your resilience through all of this. And
it
so
took
when
a long time. It really took a long time. And I'll tell you, if you met me, let's say 7 years ago, oh my gosh, I was an absolute wreck. I went to work, I did my thing. How on earth I never got, fired at every single job I had during that time, because frankly, sometimes I could not get out of work and go to bed. And I didn't feel that I could tell my boss or my leadership team that I'm depressed. I can't get out of bed today. And I'm crying in my bed. I didn't know, I didn't feel like there was this way of doing that and not be judged at work, because I think there are all these stigmas, and I think it's getting better, but I think there are these stigmas around mental health. And for me, it impacted my mental health significantly, but I've now learned how to manage my mental health in a way where, okay, all right, get up, go to work, do my thing. I'd be lying if I didn't say that sometimes I can't get out of bed, and I think about those days.
Yeah. Melissa, thank you so much. I want to interrupt with all of this, right? I have a lot of questions, but the guys are in the chat. Melissa, you're so great. Thank you for sharing your story. You're an inspiration. You're amazing. Mother of one, no, mother of several kids. # inspiration. Inspiring. I just want to share that, bring some life to the discussion. Melissa, let us talk about resilience, right? So in all of this, there's a common theme here, because you're talking about mental health, and this is real. We're humans first. Yesterday we did a presentation and they talk about the myth of the employee, the fact that when you become this employed person, you're now an employee. We're humans first, we're people first. Let us talk about resilience. Because as I was preparing for this interview, there's a quote that I stumbled across, and it says, "Throughout my journey, I have learned resilience and how to fuel my pain into something bigger than me." And you shared that with us. But tell us one thing that you have learned about resilience. And just imagine we were your children and you needed to just, give us something that we could take with us.
So for me, I'm reading a book right now that's all about the growth mindset. And it is all about learning that failure is just an opportunity to learn, and you need to appreciate the journey. And that, sometimes we don't understand the setbacks in front of us, or the mistakes that we make, or the failures that we have, or a failure that someone else might have that impacts us. And I think that it's just as important to kind of recognize that, hey, it's inevitable that things are always going to change, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad. And it's up to us to identify how we can bring new learning and skills and strength and grit when stuff doesn't go your way. Now, I hope that nobody has anything as awful happen to them as happened to me, but I think that it's important to know that bad stuff is going to happen to you. You are going to meet people who do not have your best interest in mind. You are going to meet bullies. You are going to meet trolls. You are going to meet people who you think you can trust. And those might be the very people to destroy you. And I think that that's just part of life. You take the good with the bad, but I think it's important to still take on challenges and look at how you can take that bad and turn it into something bigger and positive. So I look at, wow, the negative aspect of, me losing my kids, and in reality, I haven't lost them. Once they're old enough, they are all going to be with me. We're besties. I fly out to Tunisia as much as I can. And, I started a company there. So instead of saying, oh yeah, take my kids, I lost, things didn't work out. All right, fine. So let me start a crew of companies. Let me go on your national news, not talking about my personal situation, but talk about the work that I'm doing and we're doing to empower young people through education. And so it's very often that my ex-husband and his family will turn on the TV and I will be right there speaking in his dialect about education in the country. And it's very common that someone will come up to me like, oh, are you related to Melissa Sassi? Because you know what? I didn't change my last name. And so
Melissa,
I created a bit of a legacy underneath his name. And it often comes up where they're like, oh, you're Melissa Sassi's mom.
So good. So good.
And it's a little bit of a fun revenge, even though I'm not a fan of revenge. I forgive him for what he has done because I know if he could take it back, I know he would. And I know that he knows it was one of the biggest mistakes of his life. And his life has suffered, and he has suffered. He would never admit it because there's that pride thing that gets in the way. But he also knows that my kids and I are besties. And I know about what's going on every minute of the day. And you know why? Because they know I love them. They know I care about them. And they know I've been working to build a world that will be better for them both now and in the future.
Beautiful. Melissa, thank you. Such good gems here. The interrelational coming out very strongly. And, whether it's with the father of your children, a sibling, an employee, a boss, the interrelational will always be important. And so it's just good stuff to think about. Melissa, we could go many ways in terms of direction with our interview, but I want to get into the fact that you're working with early stage entrepreneurs. So we're talking about girls in tech, we're talking about personal branding, all the things, but you're working particularly with early stage entrepreneur. Why this particular group?
Yeah, so I have recently expanded my areas of responsibility, which I'm really excited about. And I think it's also exciting because I work with a number of different Atlas Fellows. We have 5 Atlas Fellows between my respective programs. And I was just doing the math to make sure I did that right. We're, I think, adding another one soon. So we'll have 6 Atlas Fellows working with us. But part of my job is I'm the global head of a startup program. We have 45 startups in our portfolio now. We'll have 100 by the end of this year. And for me, it goes back to that same narrative. How do you teach people tech skills? How do you mentor them? How do you help them to build and scale to make meaningful use of the technology and internet in front of them to drive outcomes? Because I focus on fintech, health tech, and insurtech, that could be financial inclusion, access to capital. It could be healthcare outcomes, people gaining access to care. A big piece of what I do is tech for good. So I often look at how can we do well while doing good? How can we not just do business for the sake of business, to create money for the sake of it, which is obviously important, but how can we also leave the world in a better place than it was left for us? I also have responsibility globally in the IBM Z division over student experience. So I have 2 different realms of audiences, if you will, that I work with. Early stage, so less than 5 years old, less than $1 million in revenue. I focus exclusively on companies that are handling, collecting, storing personally identifiable information. So that would be medical records, healthcare records, insurance records, again, at the individual level. And I'm working on a mission to redefine what it means to protect data and turn it more into a human right, if you will, or a social good aspect. And what I mean by that is companies should not be protecting our data because the government tells them to. They should be doing it because it's the right thing to do, and that data tech requires investment and protection. And right now, a lot of companies are not protecting our data to the highest extent possible, even though solutions exist that could give them, for lack of better words, the Fort Knox of data protection, privacy, and security. So I'm building a lot of awareness around this. I'm building a coalition for startups that are privacy first. And I'm hoping that I will create more of a movement that brings in a lot of, let's call multi-stakeholder, a multi-stakeholder approach where you have government, private sector, public sector, nonprofit, academia, everyone really coming together to redefine what it means to protect data, and doing that through technology as opposed to policy.
That's critical, Melissa, because you're talking about multi-stakeholder, and you mentioned so much just now. But very often when we think of tech, we're thinking about, oh, those guys over in Silicon Valley, or those guys that, they're bringing into the Senate to answer to questions. But it's really it's a responsibility that we all share to get things done in a way that works for everyone, developing and so on. So what are some of the barriers you see to this cross-sector collaboration? And I know there are some misconceptions that people in tech may have about people in nonprofit and social and so on. What kind of barriers do you see, and maybe how we could overcome those?
So I think that there are a number of different barriers. One of the, biggest challenges that I would say there are probably three that I'm working on right now that are, and don't get me wrong, there are more challenges than that, but there are three that I'm kind of focused on. One is, if you don't have access to the internet, you're left behind. If you do not have access to affordable internet, you're left behind.
Right.
If you do not have access to physical technology, you are left behind. So I would call one challenge being digital inclusion. All right. And that's more of the access space. And then I would kind of incorporate access to digital skills, another component. And I see digital skills as a gamut of competencies, a wheel. And I am on a working group within the IEEE where we work to standardize and create a global standard for what it means to be digitally literate. It was endorsed by the IEEE Standards Board. It's the first world standard. We're just at the C20, which is the civil society version of the G20 in Riyadh. And they recently endorsed the standard. And if you think about it, why does this matter? If you go out to a boot camp, you go to school, everybody defines digital literacy differently. And so if you think about it, we define literacy and we know what literacy is, right? It's the same definition everywhere. We measure it, we report out on it. But digital literacy is reported out in pockets and with fragmented definitions. Mm-hmm. And so how are we all going to go into a job and be prepared if we can't even decide what the heck this digital literacy thing means? So that's kind of where I started a few years ago. It's incorporated into my PhD research, which is all about the digital inclusion of underserved and underrepresented communities, and the role that access, skills, and utilization play to drive outcomes, whether that's education outcomes, economic outcomes, agricultural outcomes, political, social, whatever. Mm-hmm. Now, if you dive deep into one aspect of digital skills, and I will call out one thing that you just said, you talked about guys in Silicon Valley. And the exact word you used was guys, right? Mm-hmm. Now, this is one of our biggest challenges, and that's diversity and inclusion in tech, because there is this misconception around what is computer science? What does it mean to learn to code? Let me break down a barrier for those of you who do not have, who have a misconception of what it is. It's a language. It's like learning French. It's like learning Arabic or Spanish. It's computational thinking. It's all about giving directions. And instead of speaking to me, I'm speaking to a computer in its language. And I believe that we have this fundamental mismatch around how we teach or talk about computer science. And we think about it as a dude in the basement, a guy in the basement. It's dark, he's hacking away, there's pizza, and he's got a hoodie on, and maybe he's a gamer, and, that's what we think. Mm-hmm. And so when you have a young woman or a young girl who's getting exposed to computer science for the first time, how do we demystify what computer science is? How do we start to redefine what it actually is? And we start to look at it as an art form, a form of creative expression, just like music and dance and other aspects. So I'm on a mission right now to redefine software source code as cultural heritage and get it to be seen as creating a work of art, a painting,
beautiful,
a song, a dance.
Beautiful. That's a very interesting way to frame that. We're about to go into our breakout room. I just want to take the moment to welcome anyone who is watching us live on Facebook. Thank you for joining. Zach, can you please tell us if we have a moment to ask one more question before we go, or are we going straight into breakout at this point?
Sure. Yeah. One more question is fine.
Melissa, this is so good. I hope everyone is enjoying. I'm way too excited. But I'm happy you touched on the whole idea of women in 26%. These are the statistics. Women make up just 26% of the computing workforce and 11% of senior leadership in tech. And what has your experience been as a woman in tech? So you told us about some of the work you're trying to do to bridge that gap, but can you share just any experience that you've had? And lastly,
so,
what would you say to anyone here who is working in social sector to kind of what they could do to support that movement?
I think a couple things. Be prepared sometimes to be the only woman in the room. Be prepared to be comfortable with that, even if you're not. Be comfortable finding your voice, because sometimes your voice will not be heard, and it's incumbent upon you to make sure it is. Allies, when you notice there's only one woman in the room and she may not everybody feels comfortable to speak up. How do you bring her more into that conversation? My startup Accelerator has 53% women, 34% from the Black community. So it's not just about women and girls. It's you look in the room and where are my Black brothers and sisters sitting in that room? What about our Latinx community, or whatever that community might be in your corner of the earth that is a minority? I'm a big fan of looking at building diverse and inclusive teams that are reflective of your customers. And, I think it's hard work. I failed when I first came to IBM, and I had 8% of my startups had at least one female founder. I had 2 companies with a Black founder. And I blew that out of the water because I invested, I made a change. I realized I didn't focus appropriately. So sometimes it's, again, learning and recognizing, you know what, I might have failed there. That's okay. Let's do better this time. And I did. So let this be your catalyst to know, how can you empower women and girls to have a seat at the table? If you're being asked to present, how can you bring someone else with you? When you're being asked to write an article, how can you ask someone to co-author it with you or quote them? How can you give others a voice?
Very, very powerful. And I will just end before we go to breakout with a broader question. So we're all social entrepreneurs and working maybe at the micro level as entrepreneurs. But when we think of a bigger corporate strategy, what can some of those bigger companies do to ensure that there is this level of diversity and inclusion? Just
I think it's a combination of things. I think it's a combination of different thought, different culture, different gender, different ethnicity, different, orientation, abilities. Because at the end of the day, if your team is not diverse and inclusive, you're not going to be able to create products that are, that recognize your customer pain points, joys, frustrations. So really incorporating design thinking into everything that you do, and really thinking about being empathetic with others. I read a lot. I don't know everything. I ask dumb questions sometimes. I look back in my history and I realize, ooh, that thing that a white woman was not supposed to say to a black woman, I said it because I didn't know. Oh, that was offensive. Thank you for telling me. Now I'm not going to do that again. But you know what else I'm going to do? I'm going to tell some of my girlfriends, did you know that this was offensive? Mm-hmm. Yeah or no. Okay, now we can't do that anymore, And so I think it's, about learning, because sometimes we make dumb mistakes and we say dumb things, and sometimes our intentions are good and we just screw up. And so I think it's important to learn and express ourselves. And if we need to, go back and apologize and not be afraid to show our vulnerabilities. Like, for example, when I talked about, our first cohort, and I was mortified as a female founder. I was mortified. I had so few female founders in our group that it was embarrassing. And I knew it was happening because I saw the applications coming in. I knew I did something wrong. I didn't know what I did. It helped me get more budget. It helped me highlight the issue. And there you go. Now it's all behind us. But last year, I was really stressed and really embarrassed. But, I overcame it. And I think that's the biggest thing, is notice that you are going to fail all the time. Change is inevitable. Failure is inevitable. But use those opportunities to enjoy the journey, thrive in the journey, thrive under change, take risks, show your vulnerabilities, and just not be afraid.
Wow. Melissa, powerful. Thank you so much.